Fluency in English is something that so many people dream about. Think about it. The ability to communicate smoothly, to share your thoughts without hesitation. I remember when I was just like you, struggling, feeling shy, and sometimes frustrated. Yes, I wanted to be fluent, but I was so scared of making mistakes. One day, my teacher looked at me and said, "You can become fluent if you practice every single day." Can you believe it? That one sentence changed everything for me. I realized that fluency is not a gift, it's a goal. And like all goals, you must work for it. Fluency doesn't come in a single day. Think of it like planting a tree. You start with a tiny seed, water it, give it sunshine every day. You care for it patiently, and one day that little seed grows into a big, strong tree. Fluency in English is just like that tree. You have to nurture it bit by bit, day by day, and before you know it, you'll be speaking with confidence. One day, a student came to me, and she looked so sad. She said, "Teacher, I want to speak English, but I always forget the words." I looked at her, smiled, and said, "Don't worry. Fluency isn't about remembering every single word. It's about practice. And trust me, you're doing great." Her eyes lit up with hope. "But how can I practice?" she asked eagerly. I told her, practice is everywhere. Talk to your friends, listen to stories, sing songs. Yes, even in English. Isn't that amazing? Every moment can be a practice moment. Back when I was in school, I loved stories. Every night, I would listen to my teacher read to us, and I'd repeat each word. At first, I was so slow, but guess what? With time, I got faster, my vocabulary grew, and so did my confidence. One day, a student asked me, "Teacher, is fluency just about speaking fast?" I laughed and said, "No, fluency is about speaking clearly and confidently, so others can understand you. You don't need to rush, you just need to speak from the heart." I had a boy in my class once who spoke so fast, but honestly, no one could understand him. I told him, "Slow down, speak clearly, use simple words." And do you know what happened? Soon everyone could understand him, and he became so much more confident. He actually enjoyed speaking English. Fluency really is like a journey where you take one step at a time. Don't rush, enjoy every step, because one day you'll look back and see how far you've come. Now let me share a secret with you. Are you ready? The secret to fluency is listening. Yes, listening. Listen to others speak English. Listen to stories, to songs, to conversations. The more you listen, the more you learn. I knew a girl who loved music. She would listen to English songs every day, and soon she started singing along. Her fluency improved just like that. Isn't that incredible? Let me tell you about something really important. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Mistakes are your best teachers. I once had a student who was so scared of making mistakes. She would sit quietly because she thought everyone would laugh at her if she said something wrong. I told her, "Hey, don't worry about mistakes. Every mistake is a lesson." One day she decided to try speaking in class. She made plenty of mistakes, but she didn't stop. And with every word she spoke, she grew more confident. That was the moment she truly started her journey to fluency. Thinking in English is another big step. When you think in English, you start to speak naturally. I had a student who would always translate from his language to English in his mind, and it made him so slow and confused. I advised him, try thinking in English even when you're alone. Think in English. Slowly but surely, he became more fluent, and soon he was speaking without any translation at all. Another way to build fluency is reading. When you read, you learn new words. You see how sentences are formed, and you get a sense of the language. When I was learning English, I would read simple books. Every time I found a new word, I'd write it down, then try to use it in a sentence. I remember a student came to me with a book and said, "Teacher, I read this, but I didn't understand everything." I told her, "That's okay. The more you read, the more you'll understand." She kept reading every day, and over time, her fluency soared. Have you ever recorded yourself speaking? It's an amazing way to improve. I had a student who would record herself reading a story every day. She'd listen to the recording, find areas to improve, and soon she sounded so fluent. This is a fantastic exercise because it helps you become more aware of your own voice. Sometimes having a friend to practice with can make all the difference. I had two students who were best friends, and they decided to speak only in English with each other. Every day they would have fun conversations, helping each other with words they didn't know. Over time, both of them became very fluent. Isn't that beautiful? They learned from each other and truly enjoyed the process. Fluency also comes from using English in real-life situations. When you're at the market, try speaking in English. When you're with friends, switch to English. The more you use it, the more fluent you become. I remember one student who worked in a shop. He decided to speak only in English with his customers. At first, it was hard, but with time, he became more confident and fluent. Real-life practice is so powerful. Curiosity is another key. When you hear a new word, don't ignore it. Look it up, find out what it means, and then try using it in your next conversation. I had a student who was extremely curious. Every time he heard a new word, he'd ask me about it. Then he'd use it as much as possible. His vocabulary grew, and his fluency improved so much. Curiosity really pays off. Having a goal makes you more motivated. Ask yourself, why do I want to be fluent in English? I knew a student whose goal was to travel to an English-speaking country. Every day she practiced because she wanted to be ready for her trip. This goal kept her motivated, and by the time she traveled, she was speaking fluently. Enjoying the process is so important. Fluency doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. But if you enjoy the journey, it feels easier. I had a student who loved watching English movies. Every night, he'd watch one. At first, He used subtitles, but after a while he could watch without them. He enjoyed the movies, and at the same time, he was improving his fluency. Repetition is powerful. The more you repeat, the better you become. I remember a student who loved to repeat sentences. He'd hear something in class and say it over and over. This helped him remember the sentences, and soon he was using them in daily conversations. Practicing with different people also helps. Each person has a unique way of speaking, and by talking to various people, you learn different styles. I had a student who was very shy and only spoke to me. I encouraged him to talk to other students, and although he was nervous at first, he eventually became comfortable. His fluency improved so much. When you talk about something you love, the words come more easily. I had a student who was passionate about football. Every day he'd talk to me about it, and his fluency improved because he was speaking about something that excited him. Fluency also means being okay with not knowing every word. Sometimes you may not know the exact word, and that's perfectly fine. Try to describe it in another way. I had a student who would stop speaking if he didn't know a word. I told him, if you don't know the word, just explain it differently. This helped him keep the conversation going and stay relaxed. And now the question is for you. What inspires you to keep going on your journey to fluency? Fluency in English also grows when you practice in front of a mirror. Yes, it may sound funny, but seeing yourself speak helps you become aware of your expressions and gestures. I had a student who was really shy about speaking in front of others. I suggested, why not practice in front of a mirror? At first, she felt a little awkward, but slowly she became more comfortable. Soon, she was speaking more confidently even in front of others. What if you forget a word while speaking? Don't panic. It happens to everyone. Just take a deep breath and keep talking. Sometimes the word will come to you later. If it doesn't, use another word to describe it. I had a student who would stop and freeze whenever he forgot a word. I encouraged him. Don't stop. Just keep going. You're doing great. Over time, he learned to stay calm, even if he didn't know the exact word. It helped him become more fluent and relaxed. Taking breaks is also important. Fluency isn't just about practicing nonstop. Sometimes your brain needs a rest. I knew a student who practiced constantly, and after a while she felt frustrated and tired. I told her, take a break, relax, and come back tomorrow with a fresh mind. And you know what? She felt so much better after resting, and her fluency kept improving. Remember, it's okay to take a breather. Using English in creative ways can make learning so much fun. You could write a short story, sing a song, or even make a video. I had a student who loved to write, so every day she would write short stories in English. This helped her practice new words and sentences. Soon, she started reading her stories aloud, and her fluency blossomed. Creativity makes learning enjoyable and gives you a chance to experiment with the language. Teaching others is another powerful way to become fluent. When you teach, you're also learning. I had a student who was already quite fluent, so she decided to help her friends who weren't as confident. She would teach them new words, practice conversations with them, and explain concepts. Not only did her friends improve, but she became even more fluent herself. Isn't that amazing? Setting a routine can be a game changer. Having a dedicated time for practice keeps you consistent. I had a student who practiced every morning for 30 minutes. This was his routine, and he followed it every day. Slowly but surely, his fluency improved. A routine helps you stay disciplined and ensures you keep practicing. Remember, it's the small, steady steps that lead to big progress. Being patient with yourself is crucial. Fluency takes time, and it's normal to feel impatient at times. I remember a student who wanted to be fluent quickly. He became frustrated when he didn't see fast results. I told him, "Be patient. You're improving, even if it's slow." He listened to me, continued to practice, and over time he saw real improvement. Sometimes the journey is slow, but every bit of effort counts. Listening is just as important as speaking. When you listen carefully, you learn how to respond, and you understand the rhythm of the language. I had a student who was a fantastic listener. Before he spoke, he would listen attentively, which made his responses clear and thoughtful. Listening is a huge part of becoming fluent because it helps you pick up on nuances and understand different ways of speaking. Keeping a positive attitude can make a big difference. Learning a language can be challenging, but staying positive makes it so much easier. I had a student who always smiled even when she made mistakes. She would laugh, correct herself, and try again. Her positive attitude kept her motivated, and she eventually became fluent. Remember, positivity is like fuel for learning. It keeps you going even on tough days. Sometimes stepping out of your comfort zone is necessary. I had a student who was very comfortable speaking English in class, but felt shy outside of school. I encouraged her, try speaking to people outside too. At first, she was nervous, but with time, she became more confident and fluent. Taking small risks helps you grow and makes you more adaptable in different situations. Observing fluent speakers can also be incredibly helpful. Watch how they speak, listen to their intonation, and learn from their style. I had a student who admired a famous English speaker. She would watch his videos and try to mimic his way of speaking. Over time, she improved her own fluency, developing a style that felt natural and confident. It's important to celebrate every little victory along the way. Each time you learn a new word or speak without hesitation, celebrate it. I had a student who would celebrate even the smallest achievements, and it made her feel proud. These small victories motivated her to keep going. Celebrating keeps you aware of your progress, reminding you of how far you've come. What if you get stuck while speaking? It's okay to pause and think. Take a deep breath, collect your thoughts, and then continue. I had a student who felt very nervous whenever he got stuck, but I told him, it's okay to pause. It's part of the process. This advice helped him stay calm, manage his pauses, and ultimately, his fluency improved. It's also beneficial to practice what you've learned. If you pick up a new word today, try to use it tomorrow. I had a student who would learn a new word every day and then use it in a sentence. This helped him remember the words naturally and made them part of his daily vocabulary. Practice makes each word a lasting part of your language. Learn from your surroundings. Sometimes English is all around you, from signs to posters and even menus. I had a student who loved exploring the city. Every time he saw an English sign, he'd read it and try to understand it. This simple practice introduced him to new words and phrases that he could use in conversations. There's English in everyday life if you look closely. Understanding the culture behind the language adds another layer to fluency. English is spoken differently across the world, and each culture has its own way of using it. I had a student who was fascinated by British English. She would watch British shows, read about their culture, and soon she started picking up different expressions and phrases. This helped her understand various speaking styles and made her more adaptable. Body language also plays a role in fluency. When you speak, your body language adds meaning to your words. I had a student who was very expressive. Even when he used simple sentences, his body language made him seem more fluent and people understood him better. Learning how to use gestures naturally adds confidence to your speech. Challenging yourself to speak on unfamiliar topics can boost your fluency. I had a student who loved sports, but he decided to talk about science for a change. At first, it was difficult, but with time, he learned new words and became comfortable discussing different subjects. Fluency grows when you push your boundaries and try new topics. Being relaxed helps your words flow more easily. I had a student who was very tense when speaking. I told him, take a few deep breaths before you speak. Relax. This simple practice helped him feel at ease, and his fluency improved remarkably. When you're relaxed, the words just come to you. Asking questions is a fantastic way to start conversations. When you ask questions, you engage others and it leads to more practice. I had a student who was great at asking questions about people's day, hobbies, and interests. This habit kept him constantly practicing and learning new ways to express himself. Reflecting on your progress is also motivating. Every few weeks, take a moment to think about how much you've improved. I had a student who kept a journal. Every week, he'd write about his progress in learning English, and this reflection helped him see how far he'd come. It motivated him to keep going. Being flexible with your language is another useful skill. Sometimes you need to rephrase to make your meaning clear. I had a student who was very adaptable. If someone didn't understand him, he would change his sentence until they did. This made him more fluent because he could adjust to different situations. Connecting with other learners is so valuable. When you learn with others, You share experiences, tips, and encouragement. I had a student who joined an English club. Every week, she met with other learners, practiced speaking, and gained motivation from their support. Learning together creates a positive environment. Setting small goals can make your journey feel more achievable. Instead of saying, I want to be fluent, try something specific like, I want to learn 5 new words this week. I had a student who set small weekly goals. Each time she achieved one, she felt more confident. These small steps added up, and soon she was speaking fluently. Persistence is key. Even when it feels hard, don't give up. I had a student who struggled with English and wanted to quit many times, but he kept going. And one day, he realized he was speaking more fluently than ever before. Persistence pays off even if it takes time. Sometimes it helps to review what you've learned. Revisiting old lessons reinforces what you know and makes you more confident. I had a student who would review her notes every month, and it helped her remember key points and use them effectively. Being open-minded also aids fluency. You might hear different ways to say the same thing, and that's a wonderful part of learning a language. I had a student who loved learning about different dialects. He would explore how people from various places spoke, making him adaptable and fluent in different settings. Enjoy the language. Find something you love in English, whether it's a book, a movie, or a song. Enjoying the language brings a natural passion to your learning. I had a student who adored English poetry. Every day she'd read poems, trying to understand and feel the language. This made her more passionate, and her fluency improved as she connected with the words on a deeper level. Asking for feedback is also a powerful tool in becoming fluent. When you speak, ask someone to give you honest feedback. I had a student who would always ask for feedback after speaking. This helped him see areas for improvement and to understand what he was doing well. Feedback allows you to grow and become a better speaker. Another effective way to improve fluency is by using flashcards. Write down new words on flashcards and review them regularly. I had a student who made flashcards for every new word he learned. He would go over them daily, and this helped him remember the words and naturally use them in conversations. Flashcards are a simple yet powerful way to reinforce your vocabulary. Being comfortable with silence is also part of fluency. Sometimes you need a moment to think before you speak, and that's okay. I had a student who was afraid of silence. He thought he had to respond immediately. I told him, it's okay to pause and gather your thoughts. This made him feel more comfortable, and he began speaking more clearly. Learning phrases instead of just individual words can also make your sentences sound more natural. I had a student who focused on learning phrases, and it transformed her speaking style. She was able to form more fluent sentences, and it made her speech sound more connected. Phrases help you understand how words work together in real contexts. Being curious about the world adds excitement to your language learning. When you explore different cultures and ideas, you have more to talk about. I had a student who loved history. His knowledge of various topics made him an interesting conversationalist, and it enriched his English vocabulary. The road to fluency isn't always easy, but it's incredibly rewarding. Just like a river flows steadily toward the ocean, your efforts will carry you closer to your goal. Fluency is not just about speaking smoothly, but about connecting with others, sharing your unique voice, and building bridges of understanding. Every word you learn, every sentence you speak, is like adding another brick to that bridge. It leads to new understanding, friendships, and opportunities. So keep learning, keep speaking, and let your voice be heard. You are on a journey, and every step brings you closer to fluency. And now I have a question for you. What inspires you to keep going on your journey to fluency? What motivates you on this incredible path? Remember, every step you take is an achievement, and your fluency will only grow stronger. So stay curious, stay motivated, and let your English journey be a part of who you are. Embrace it, enjoy it, and watch yourself grow. Your voice matters, and with every word you speak, you're making your mark on the world. The story of America begins with the arrival of Native American tribes thousands of years ago. These tribes had their own cultures, languages, and ways of life. They lived across the land we now call the United States, from the forests to the plains to the coasts. Each tribe adapted to its surroundings, using local resources to survive. In the 1500s, European explorers, mainly from Spain, England, and France, arrived in search of new land and resources. The Spanish set up colonies in the south and west, while the English began settlements along the east coast. These early interactions often led to clashes with Native Americans, as Europeans claimed land and resources. In 1607, the English established their first permanent colony in Jamestown, Virginia. Life was very hard for the settlers, who faced disease, hunger, and conflicts with nearby tribes. But over time, more people came from Europe, and other colonies grew, including Massachusetts and New York. The colonies developed economies based on farming, trading, and labor. In the South, large plantations grew tobacco and cotton, often using enslaved Africans as labor. Meanwhile, the northern colonies focused on smaller farms, fishing, and trade, creating an early economy that depended on different types of work. By the 1700s, the colonies were mostly self-governed, but still under British control. However, conflicts grew as Britain started taxing the colonies heavily after fighting expensive wars in Europe. The colonies felt these taxes were unfair since they had no say in British government decisions. In 1776, American leaders, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin, decided to fight for independence. They wrote the Declaration of Independence, stating that people have a right to freedom. This marked the start of the American Revolutionary War, a battle for independence from Britain. The war lasted until 1783, when the colonies defeated the British with help from France. The new country, the United States of America was formed. Leaders soon created the U.S. Constitution, a set of rules for the government. This established a democracy where leaders are chosen by the people. In the early 1800s, the U.S. expanded westward, buying land and moving settlers into new areas. This was called manifest destiny, the belief that Americans had the right to settle all land to the Pacific Ocean. Sadly, this led to the forced removal of many Native American tribes from their land. By the mid-1800s, tension over slavery grew between the northern and southern states. The North was against slavery, while the South depended on it for their economy. These disagreements led to the Civil War in 1861, a bloody conflict that lasted 4 years and divided the nation. In 1865, the North won, and slavery was abolished. The country began a period called Reconstruction to rebuild the South and help freed slaves gain rights. However, this was a difficult time, and many freed people continued to face discrimination and hardship. The late 1800s and early 1900s saw rapid industrial growth, with factories, railroads, and new inventions like the telephone. Cities grew quickly as people moved from farms to work in factories. Immigrants from Europe and Asia also came in large numbers, looking for jobs and new opportunities. The U.S. became involved in World War I in 1917, helping to end the war and gaining more influence globally. But in the 1930s, the Great Depression hit, causing widespread poverty and unemployment. President Franklin D. Roosevelt responded with programs to help Americans get back on their feet. In 1941, the U.S. entered World War II after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. American forces fought in Europe and Asia, helping to defeat Nazi Germany and Japan. After the war, the U.S. emerged as a world superpower, entering a period of tension with the Soviet Union, called the Cold War. The 1950s and 1960s were times of social change, with the Civil Rights Movement fighting for equal rights for Black Americans. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. pushed for an end to racial segregation. This movement led to important changes, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In the 1970s and 1980s, the U.S. faced challenges like the Vietnam War and economic struggles, but it continued to grow and develop. The Cold War finally ended in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union, leaving the U.S. as the world's leading superpower. In recent decades, the U.S. has faced new challenges including terrorism, economic recessions, and debates over issues like health care and immigration. Yet, the country remains a place of opportunity and freedom for many, continuing to influence the world in areas like technology, culture, and politics. Ancient American history starts with people arriving on the continent over 15,000 years ago. These first people likely traveled from Asia, crossing a land bridge called Beringia, which connected Asia to Alaska. They spread across North and South America, adapting to different environments along the way. Over time, These early groups developed unique cultures and ways of life based on the land around them. In the Great Plains, some groups became skilled hunters of large animals like bison. In forested areas, they learned to fish, farm, and gather wild plants for food and resources. Around 3,000 years ago, some ancient groups began farming and forming permanent villages. In present-day Mexico, people grew crops like corn, beans, and squash, which became staple foods. This allowed populations to grow and villages to expand, eventually leading to large, complex societies. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec civilization was one of the earliest advanced cultures, around 1200 BCE. They built large stone heads and had complex beliefs, influencing later cultures. The Olmecs created the foundation for religious ideas, writing, and art that spread to later civilizations like the Maya and Aztecs. The Maya civilization thrived in the Yucatan Peninsula and surrounding areas from around 250 to 900 CE. They built large cities, created a complex calendar, and developed writing to record history and events. The Maya excelled in astronomy and mathematics, with cities featuring impressive pyramids and temples. Further north, in what is now the United States, ancient groups like the ancestral Puebloans developed unique cultures. The ancestral Puebloans built cliff dwellings in the Southwest, some of which still stand today. They developed complex irrigation systems to grow crops in the dry desert climate. In the Midwest and southeastern U.S., the Mississippian culture emerged around 700 CE. They built large mounds as part of their cities, the largest being Cahokia, near modern-day Sian. Lewis. These mounds served as platforms for temples and homes of leaders, showing the society's structure and beliefs. In the Andes Mountains of South America, the Chavin and later the Inca civilization flourished. The Inca built roads and bridges across mountains, connecting a vast empire. They practiced terraced farming to grow crops on steep hillsides and developed advanced methods for storage and transportation. Many ancient American cultures had spiritual beliefs that connected them to nature. They often believed in gods linked to the sun, moon, rain, and earth. Art, symbols, and rituals reflected their understanding of the world, showing respect for natural forces and the cycle of life. Trade networks connected these ancient societies, allowing them to exchange goods and ideas. Shells, obsidian, and copper were traded over great distances, spreading tools, crafts, and cultural practices. Trade helped cultures learn from each other, mixing beliefs and technologies across the Americas. Over time, environmental changes, droughts, and conflicts affected these ancient societies. Some groups, like the Maya, faced challenges that led to the decline of their cities. Others adapted to changes, moving to new areas or changing their way of life to survive. By the time Europeans arrived in the Americas in the late 1400s, many diverse groups had long-established communities. Each culture had unique traditions, languages, and knowledge suited to their surroundings. These early American societies laid the foundation for the history and culture of the Americas. When Europeans arrived in the Americas in the late 1400s, they encountered many Native American tribes with their own cultures. Christopher Columbus, an explorer from Spain, reached the Caribbean in 1492. He thought he had found a new route to Asia, not a new continent. His arrival marked the beginning of European exploration and colonization in the Americas. The Spanish soon established colonies in the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. They searched for gold, silver, and other resources, often forcing native people into labor. This led to violence and disease, which killed large numbers of Native Americans. Spanish influence spread with missions, where they tried to convert native people to Christianity. In the 1600s, the English, French, and Dutch also began setting up colonies in North America. The English established Jamestown, Virginia in 1607, which became the first permanent English settlement. Life was difficult due to food shortages and conflicts with native tribes, but eventually the colony grew, attracting more settlers seeking land and new opportunities. The English colonies expanded along the East Coast, with settlements like Massachusetts, New York, and Pennsylvania. These colonies developed different economies. The South relied on farming and plantations, while the North focused on trade and small farms. Colonists often clashed with native tribes over land, pushing them farther west. Many European settlers brought enslaved Africans to work on plantations, especially in the southern colonies. The slave trade grew, bringing millions of Africans to the Americas under brutal conditions. Slavery became central to the economy in the South, where large plantations grew tobacco, cotton, and other crops. By the 1700s, the British colonies were mostly self-governed, but under British control. Tensions rose as Britain imposed new taxes to pay off war debts from conflicts in Europe. Colonists felt these taxes were unfair because they had no representation in British Parliament, leading to protests and boycotts against British goods. In 1776, American leaders like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson decided to seek independence from Britain. They wrote the Declaration of Independence, declaring their right to be free. This led to the American Revolutionary War, a long and difficult fight against British forces that lasted until 1783. The United States won the war with help from France, officially gaining independence. After the war, American leaders created the U.S. Constitution, establishing a democratic government. This document set up rules for electing leaders and protecting citizens' rights, laying the foundation for the new nation. In the early 1800s, the U.S. began expanding westward, acquiring land through treaties, purchases, and wars. President Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory from France in 1803, doubling the country's size. This period of expansion was called Manifest Destiny, the belief that Americans had a right to settle land to the Pacific Ocean. Westward expansion often harmed Native American tribes, who were forced off their lands. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 led to the forced relocation of thousands of Native Americans, most famously on the Trail of Tears. Many Native people suffered greatly, losing their homes and lives as settlers moved west. In the mid-1800s, disagreements over slavery grew between the northern and southern states. The North opposed slavery, while the South depended on it for its economy. These tensions led to the Civil War in 1861, a bloody conflict that divided the nation. The war lasted 4 years, resulting in the North's victory and the abolition of slavery. After the Civil War, the U.S. entered a period called Reconstruction, aimed at rebuilding the South and supporting freed slaves. Amendments were added to the Constitution to grant former slaves citizenship and voting rights. However, discrimination and segregation continued, making life difficult for many Black Americans. During the late 1800s, the United States grew rapidly in industry, with railroads, factories, and new inventions like the telephone. Cities expanded as people moved from farms to urban areas for work. This period, called the Industrial Revolution, transformed American society, bringing both progress and challenges. In the early 1900s, the U.S. became involved in global events, joining World War I in 1917. The war ended in 1918, and the U.S. emerged as a powerful country on the world stage. But in the 1930s, the Great Depression hit, causing widespread poverty. President Franklin D. Roosevelt created programs to help people and revive the economy. The U.S. entered World War II in 1941 after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. American forces fought in Europe and the Pacific, helping defeat Germany and Japan. After the war ended in 1945, the U.S. became a global superpower, entering a period of competition with the Soviet Union known as the Cold War. In the 1950s and 1960s, the Civil Rights Movement sought equal rights for Black Americans. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks fought to end segregation and discrimination. Their efforts led to new laws, like the Civil Rights Act, which aimed to protect the rights of all Americans. The Cold War ended in 1991, leaving the U.S. as the world's leading superpower. Since then, the country has faced new challenges including terrorism, economic changes, and debates over social issues. Despite these challenges, the U.S. continues to grow and change, remaining influential around the world. In the 1500s, European explorers began arriving in the Americas, seeking new routes, land, and wealth. Christopher Columbus, sailing for Spain, reached the Caribbean islands in 1492, thinking he had found a way to Asia. His journey marked the beginning of European exploration in the Americas. Soon, other explorers followed, changing the region forever. Spanish explorers like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro traveled to Central and South America in search of gold and other riches. They conquered large native empires like the Aztecs in Mexico and the Incas in Peru. These conquests brought great wealth to Spain, but caused devastation and suffering for native populations. As the Spanish claimed large parts of the Americas, they set up colonies and missions. Missions were religious communities where native people were converted to Christianity. Spanish settlers established towns and forts, often forcing native people to work on farms and in mines. This led to a blend of European and native cultures, especially in language and religion. French and Portuguese explorers also arrived in the Americas in the 1500s. The French explored parts of North America, including Canada and the Great Lakes region, setting up trade with native tribes. The Portuguese focused on South America, where they established Brazil as a colony. These early explorations opened up new lands for European powers. Throughout the 1500s, European diseases like smallpox and measles spread among native populations who had no immunity to them. These diseases caused large-scale deaths, killing millions of Native Americans. This loss of life weakened many native societies, making it harder for them to resist European colonization. By the late 1500s, England also became interested in North America. English explorers like Sir Walter Raleigh attempted to set up colonies on the East Coast. In 1587, Raleigh founded the Lost Colony of Roanoke in what is now North Carolina. However, when supply ships returned later, the colony had mysteriously disappeared with little trace left behind. European exploration and colonization in the 1500s changed the Americas in lasting ways. Native cultures were disrupted, and European customs, languages, and religions began to spread. The competition among European powers to control land and resources in the Americas would continue and grow in the coming centuries. By the end of the 1500s, the foundations of European colonization were set in the Americas. Spain had large colonies, and France and England were interested in expanding their influence. The interactions between Europeans and Native Americans were complex, involving trade, conflict, and cultural exchange. The stage was set for the vast changes of the next century. In the early 1600s, English settlers began coming to North America to start new colonies. The first successful English colony was Jamestown, Virginia, founded in 1607. Life was hard, with food shortages, disease, and conflicts with native tribes. However, tobacco farming eventually made the colony profitable and attracted more settlers. In 1620, a group of English pilgrims seeking religious freedom settled in Plymouth, Massachusetts. They sailed on a ship called the Mayflower and signed the Mayflower Compact, agreeing to govern themselves. The Pilgrims faced a harsh winter, and many died, but Native Americans like Squanto helped them survive. Plymouth became one of the earliest successful colonies. Throughout the 1600s, more English colonies were established along the East Coast, each with unique reasons and ways of life. In Massachusetts, Puritans founded colonies to practice their religion freely. In Maryland, Catholics settled for religious freedom. In New York, the Dutch first settled, but the English later took control. Colonial life in the 1600s was challenging, with people building their own homes, farming, and hunting. Colonies in the north focused on small farms, fishing, and trade, while southern colonies grew cash crops like tobacco on large plantations. Southern colonies began using enslaved Africans for labor, a practice that grew over time. The colonies often had conflicts with Native American tribes, especially as settlers took more land. In New England, the Pequot War in 1637 and King Philip's War in 1675 were violent conflicts between colonists and native tribes. These wars led to the loss of native lands and weakened native communities in the region. In the mid-1600s, England began enforcing stricter control over the colonies. The colonies were expected to trade only with England and follow English laws. This was called mercantilism, where colonies provided raw materials to the mother country. Some colonists disliked these restrictions, but they had little power to resist. In 1676, tensions between wealthy landowners and poorer settlers led to Bacon's Rebellion in Virginia. Nathaniel Bacon and his followers attacked native tribes and challenged the colonial government. Although the rebellion failed, it exposed growing frustrations in the colonies, especially about government and land rights. Religious diversity grew as more people from different backgrounds came to the colonies. Quakers, known for their peaceful beliefs, settled in Pennsylvania, a colony founded by William Penn in 1681. Pennsylvania became a place for religious freedom and attracted many settlers, adding to the colony's diversity. Slavery increased in the 1600s, especially in southern colonies, where large plantations needed a steady labor force. Enslaved Africans were brought to America on crowded ships in terrible conditions. Slavery became central to the economy in colonies like Virginia and South Carolina, shaping society for generations. By the end of the 1600s, the colonies were becoming more established with their own governments, economies, and cultures. Each colony had an elected assembly, allowing some self-governance under English rule. This experience with self-government planted early ideas of independence, though the colonies remained loyal to England. As the century closed, American colonies had grown in population, wealth, and diversity. The colonies were still small compared to the Native American populations around them, but they were expanding quickly. The foundation was set for further growth and future conflicts over land, power, and freedom in the years to come. In the early 1700s, the American colonies were under British rule and growing quickly. The colonies developed their own governments and economies, but they still followed British laws. Many people came to the colonies from Europe, seeking land, freedom, and new opportunities. Colonies were spread along the East Coast, from New England to the South. The colonies' economies were diverse. In the North, people focused on small farms, trade, and shipbuilding. In the South, large plantations grew crops like tobacco and rice, using enslaved African labor. The differences between northern and southern colonies created unique cultures and ways of life, but all colonies still felt connected to Britain. In the 1750s, Britain and France fought for control of North America in the French and Indian War. Many Native American tribes joined France to defend their lands. Britain won the war in 1763, gaining French territories in Canada and the Midwest. However, the war was costly, and Britain needed money to pay off its debts. To raise money, Britain imposed new taxes on the American colonies, such as the Stamp Act and the Tea Act. Colonists were angry because they had no say in British government decisions. They believed in no taxation without representation, feeling that it was unfair to be taxed without a voice in Parliament. Protests and boycotts against British goods spread through the colonies. Groups like the Sons of Liberty organized protests, and colonists began to unite against British policies. In 1770, tensions boiled over in the Boston Massacre, where British soldiers killed 5 colonists during a protest. This event increased anger toward British rule. In 1773, the Boston Tea Party took place when colonists, angry about the Tea Act, dumped British tea into Boston Harbor. This act of defiance led Britain to punish the colonies with strict laws called the Intolerable Acts. Colonists felt their freedoms were under threat, and they began to discuss independence. In 1774, representatives from the colonies met in the First Continental Congress to plan a response to British policies. They sent a letter to the king asking for fair treatment, but Britain ignored their requests. The situation grew worse, and fighting broke out between British soldiers and colonial militias in 1775, starting the Revolutionary War. In 1776, colonial leaders gathered again and decided to declare independence from Britain. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, explaining that people have the right to freedom and self-government. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress approved the Declaration, marking the birth of the United States of America. The Revolutionary War was long and difficult, lasting until 1783. The American Army, led by George Washington, faced many challenges but received help from France. The turning point came at the Battle of Saratoga, where American forces won a major victory. Eventually, Britain surrendered after the Battle of Yorktown, ending the war. After winning independence, the new United States had to create a government. The first attempt was the Articles of Confederation, which gave most power to the states. However, the Articles were too weak to handle national issues, leading to problems like economic struggles and weak defense. In 1787, leaders met to write a stronger framework for government, creating the U.S. Constitution. This document established a federal system with 3 branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. The Constitution included checks and balances to ensure that no branch would have too much power, setting the foundation for American democracy. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States under the new Constitution. His presidency helped set traditions for future leaders. The new government faced challenges, but it aimed to protect freedom unite the states, and serve as an example of democracy for the world. At the end of the 1700s, the U.S. added the Bill of Rights to the Constitution, listing key freedoms like speech and religion. These amendments protected citizens' rights and responded to fears of government abuse. By the close of the century, America was an independent nation with a strong foundation, ready to grow and face new challenges. In the early 1800s, the United States expanded rapidly, gaining new lands and moving westward. In 1703, President Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory from France, doubling the size of the country. This purchase included land from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. It opened vast areas for settlement and farming. After the Louisiana Purchase, explorers Lewis and Clark were sent to map the new territory. Their journey lasted from 1804 to 1806, reaching the Pacific Ocean. They gathered valuable information about the land, native tribes, and natural resources. Their reports encouraged many settlers to move west. In 1812, the U.S. fought the War of 1812 against Britain, partly due to British interference with American trade. The war also involved conflicts with native tribes allied with the British. The war ended in 1815 with no clear victory, but it boosted American pride. The country began feeling more united and independent. During the 1820s, more Americans pushed westward, encouraged by cheap land and a sense of opportunity. Settlers clashed with native tribes, leading to violent conflicts and forced relocations. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, forcing native tribes to leave their homelands and move west of the Mississippi. The Indian Removal Act led to the forced relocation of tribes, including the Cherokee, on routes like the Trail of Tears. Thousands suffered and died on these long, harsh journeys. Native Americans lost their traditional lands, and many were forced to adapt to unfamiliar and difficult conditions in new territories. The 1830s and 1840s were a time of social reform movements, such as the fight against slavery and efforts to improve women's rights. Many people joined the abolitionist movement, calling for an end to slavery. Leaders like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman fought for freedom, inspiring others to work for justice and equality. In the 1840s, the idea of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans had a right to expand across the continent, grew popular. This belief led to conflicts with neighboring countries. In 1846, the U.S. went to war with Mexico over border disputes. After winning, the U.S. gained large areas, including California and Texas. With new land in the West, thousands moved to California in 1848 after gold was discovered. This gold rush brought people from all over the world, hoping to get rich. Towns grew rapidly, and California's population soared. However, native people and local environments were harmed by the sudden growth and mining activities. The issue of slavery divided the country as new states were added. The North, where slavery was mostly outlawed, opposed its expansion, while the South relied on slave labor for its economy. In 1850, Congress passed the Compromise of 1850, which tried to balance free and slave states, but did not solve the growing tension. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed new territories to decide on slavery, leading to violent conflicts called Bleeding Kansas. People on both sides fought over whether Kansas should be a free or slave state. This increased tensions between North and South, showing the deep divisions over slavery. By the late 1850s, the nation was bitterly divided over slavery. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln, who opposed the spread of slavery, was elected president. Southern states feared he would end slavery and decided to secede from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. This led to the Civil War in 1861. The Civil War lasted from 1861 to 1865, pitting the Northern Union states against the Southern Confederacy. The war was brutal, with battles causing massive loss of life. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring freedom for slaves in the Confederacy. This made ending slavery a key war goal for the North. In 1865, the North won, and slavery was abolished throughout the United States. The 13th Amendment was added to the Constitution, making slavery illegal. After the war, the U.S. entered a period called Reconstruction, aiming to rebuild the South and help freed slaves gain rights and opportunities. Reconstruction saw important changes, including the 14th and 15th Amendments, granting citizenship and voting rights to Black Americans. However, the South resisted these changes, creating laws to limit Black rights. Many former slaves faced discrimination, violence, and economic hardship despite their new freedoms. The late 1800s brought rapid industrialization, with factories, railroads, and new inventions changing American life. Cities grew as people left farms to work in factories, and immigrants from Europe came looking for jobs. This industrial boom created wealth, but also led to poor working conditions and crowded urban areas. By the 1890s, the U.S. had become an economic power and was looking to expand its influence abroad. The country acquired territories like Hawaii and fought the Spanish-American War in 1898, gaining Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The 1800s ended with the U.S. as an influential nation on the world stage. In the early 1900s, the U.S. was growing quickly, with factories and cities expanding. Many immigrants came from Europe, looking for jobs and new lives. This brought diverse cultures, but also led to crowded cities and poor living conditions. Labor unions formed to fight for better wages and working hours. In 1917, the U.S. entered World War I, joining the Allies against Germany. American soldiers helped end the war in 1918, and the U.S. emerged as a powerful nation. After the war, there was economic growth in the 1920s, known as the Roaring Twenties. New inventions like cars and radios changed daily life. However, in 1929, the stock market crashed, marking the start of the Great Depression. Many people lost their jobs, homes, and savings, causing widespread poverty. President Franklin D. Roosevelt created the New Deal, a series of programs to help Americans and revive the economy. In 1941, the U.S. entered World War II after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. American forces fought in Europe and the Pacific, helping to defeat Nazi Germany and Japan. The war ended in 1945, and the U.S. emerged as one of the world's leading superpowers, along with the Soviet Union. After World War II, the U.S. entered the Cold War, a period of tension with the Soviet Union. Both nations competed in building nuclear weapons and spreading their political ideas. This rivalry also led to the space race, with the U.S. and the Soviet Union competing to explore space. In the 1950s and 1960s, the Civil Rights Movement fought for equal rights for Black Americans. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. worked to end segregation and discrimination. Major laws, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, were passed to protect voting and civil rights for all citizens. In the 1960s, the U.S. was also involved in the Vietnam War, fighting to stop the spread of communism in Asia. The war was long and controversial, with many Americans protesting against it. The U.S. eventually withdrew in 1973, and Vietnam became a united communist country. The 1970s brought economic struggles, with rising prices and unemployment. President Richard Nixon resigned in 1974 after the Watergate scandal, the first U.S. president to do so. The economy slowly improved in the 1980s under President Ronald Reagan, who focused on reducing taxes and increasing military spending. In 1991, the Cold War ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union, leaving the U.S. as the world's only superpower. The 1990s saw economic growth, and new technology like computers and the internet transformed society. President Bill Clinton's term was marked by prosperity, though it ended with political controversy. In 2001, the U.S. faced a major challenge when terrorists attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. This led to the War on Terror, with the U.S. invading Afghanistan and Iraq. The wars aimed to stop terrorism, but lasted many years and had complex impacts on both the U.S. and the world. The late 2000s brought an economic crisis called the Great Recession, causing high unemployment and home losses. The government responded with bailouts to support banks and industries. In 2008, Barack Obama was elected as the first Black president, focusing on economic recovery and healthcare reform. As the 1900s ended and the 2000s began, the U.S. continued to face challenges like immigration, climate change, and social issues. The century saw massive changes in technology, politics, and society. Despite challenges, the U.S. remained a leading global influence and continued to evolve. In 2000, a close presidential election between George W. Bush and Al Gore led to a recount in Florida. After a Supreme Court decision, Bush was declared the winner. His presidency began with a focus on tax cuts and education reform, But everything changed in 2001 with the September 11th terrorist attacks. On September 11th, 2001, terrorists from Al-Qaeda attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, killing thousands. The U.S. launched the War on Terror, targeting terrorist groups and their supporters. In 2001, the U.S. invaded Afghanistan to remove the Taliban, who were protecting al-Qaeda leaders. In 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq, claiming that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and ties to terrorism. No weapons were found, and the invasion faced criticism. The war in Iraq became lengthy and complex, with U.S. troops facing ongoing violence and instability in the region. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina devastated the Gulf Coast, especially New Orleans. The disaster displaced thousands and caused major damage. The government faced criticism for its slow response to the crisis, raising concerns about disaster preparedness and relief efforts for future emergencies. The economy grew until 2008, when the Great Recession began, caused by risky loans and a collapse in housing prices. Major banks failed, leading to widespread job losses and home foreclosures. The government approved a large bailout to save the economy, but the crisis affected millions of families. In 2008, Barack Obama was elected as the first Black president, bringing hope and excitement to many Americans. His administration focused on economic recovery and healthcare reform. In 2010, he passed the Affordable Care Act, which aimed to make health insurance more accessible, though it was controversial. During the 2010s, the U.S. began to withdraw troops from Iraq and Afghanistan, though conflicts continued in both countries. The country also saw debates over issues like immigration, gun control, and climate change. New movements, such as the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street, reflected different views on government and the economy. The 2010s also saw the rise of social media, which changed how people communicated and shared information. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram became influential in politics and culture. They connected people but also spread misinformation, creating both positive and negative effects on society. In 2016, Donald Trump was elected president, surprising many and sparking debate over his policies. His administration focused on tax cuts, deregulation, and stricter immigration laws. Trump's presidency was marked by strong opinions, both for and against him, leading to a divided political climate. The COVID-19 pandemic hit the U.S. in early 2020, causing illness, lockdowns, and economic challenges. Millions of Americans got sick, and many lost their jobs due to shutdowns. The government responded with relief packages, but the pandemic affected nearly every part of daily life and created new challenges for healthcare. In 2020, Joe Biden was elected president, focusing on managing the COVID-19 pandemic, economic recovery, and climate change. His administration also worked to address issues of racial inequality and voting rights. The 2000s and 2010 brought rapid change, with technology, politics, and global events shaping modern American society.